On the road with Rabbi Alvin Sugarman, Rabbi Emeritus of the Temple, the oldest Jewish congregation in Atlanta.
Morning, Audrey. How you doing?
Stories abound as we continue our travels on the southwest side of downtown Atlanta. Anything on the west side, you think, or like Abernathy and all that down there?
No, I don't know what the address was. When I was born, before he had Southern 5 and 10 cent store, he had a store called Community 5 and 10, and it was in the West End.
And I know a lot of Jewish people said, they were born on second base or things like that.
Yeah, no, that I did that once when I was giving blood at the Red Cross, and they were asking, there were a couple of young volunteers, and they said, where were you born? I said, second base. That's the old Piedmont Hospital, was right by here.
Was right where the old Fulton County Stadium,
right? Yeah, I mean, real near. It wasn't right on the kid.
We turn off Abernathy, heading to Pryor and Richardson.
Right there, it kind of looks like a... Could that be it?
I don't think so.
Okay. Zion
Could
Grove
be.
Baptist Church.
Wonder if
That could be the old AA, maybe.
It's got some stained glass.
I'm not sure the side of the temple.
606.
Although, the Greek Orthodox took over the old Pryor and Richardson before they went out to Claremont.
From the south side, we head back north to Midtown Atlanta, where we're also joined by a columnist for the Atlanta Jewish Times. And we're stopping at the Temple, near the corner of Peachtree and Spring Streets.
The Temple was the first synagogue in the city. And actually, we were officially formed in 1867, but we ran a Sunday school. One of our members, before we were members, before we had a congregation, one of the Jewish women had a Sunday school, a Bible study class on Sunday mornings, and interestingly enough, it was open not only for the Jewish community, but also the non-Jewish community. So we had an interfaith Bible study group, which is probably, obviously, the roots of the Temple's long-standing outreach to the interfaith community. You might be able to pull up and park right in front. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think we're blocking anybody if they come up the driveway, are they? No.
So you spent a lot of years on the pulpit here.
Right. And growing up here, and one of the more interesting memories I have was we were scheduled to have a rather large bat mitzvah service, a young woman turning 13. And when I pulled up the driveway that morning, I saw a bunch of police cars here and a lot of commotion right here in front of the door. And they had found what appeared to be a bomb. So we decided to move the service into our chapel, which was the inner part of the building, thinking it would not do any harm. We were that far inside. However, about halfway through the service, before the young woman was called to the tour, my executive director came in, and they had seen they'd already gone enough, they'd heard something ticking inside of it. And he leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, "Alvin, it's live," meaning the bomb. So we just calmly marched the young woman out and went way back to the other end of the temple, outside the temple, and held the bat mitzvah afterwards. Interestingly enough, that night, I had a 7:30 wedding in Dallas, Texas. And I was really into photography then and had my camera with me. And my wife didn't know this, but I came around here behind that wall behind us and was clicking pictures as they were defusing the bomb right in the front. And there were police cars across the street at the church all lined up. And as it turned out, it went pop. It was a fake, and it had a note inside. It was unfortunately somebody who had gotten pretty badly shell-shocked during the Vietnam War, and he was in love with the Channel 11 weather woman, and he had written her a note to get her attention, and that's what it was. When it came to trial, we dropped all the charges against him. By the time the wedding was going on in Dallas, I got to the temple about a 7:26 and grabbed the robe from the rabbi I was co-officiating with and made it. But thank goodness that was something we can look back on, not with a smile, because of the tragedy of the young veteran going through that, but that it was no harm was done as far as being hurt, especially with the temple's history of being bombed. But because of my late Rabbi Rothschild and his position on civil rights, and the fact that my territory as a traveling salesman was in Alabama, and I was coming up day after day against unbelievable hatred, and teaching the prophets was another part of the motivation of my becoming a rabbi. Never dreaming that I would be coming back to my own home congregation, but the lives that I've shared with here, and all the life cycles and the confirmation classes that I've taught in the adult, makes me feel that hopefully I've transmitted some of our tradition on. And, when I was installed here as a rabbi, I made a point of going back to Rabbi Marks, who was 1895 to 1946, 51 years, and how he was like the temple's ambassador, or really the Jewish community's ambassador to the non-Jewish community, and he had built a bridge to the non-Jewish world. Rabbi Rothschild, with his involvement in the community, had crossed that bridge. And what I said the night, and I thank both of them for what they had, and I was standing on their shoulders, but now it was time not only for the rabbis to be on the other side of the bridge, but for us to cross that bridge together. Therefore, I'm looking at the building that houses our night shelter for homeless couples, and also right next to it, they outgrew it, was our Genesis shelter for homeless newborns, and that the prophetic tradition, I remember reading the words of the prayer book, the Shabbat after we had opened the night shelter, and I said, until this moment, these had been words, but because of you, meaning the temple family and everybody, those words had become a reality, and the prophetic word had really touched people's lives.
We also asked the rabbi to reminisce about another role he played on the pulpit, playing the rabbi for the movie Driving Miss Daisy.
That was, and I remember standing right here with Morgan Freeman during the filming, and he was fuming. He was so angry. And I said, Mr. Freeman, why are you so angry? And this was around like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, because they called me at 3 a.m. and told me to be here for a 5 o'clock shoot, but they meant 5 p.m. They had gotten mixed up, and not 5 a.m. So I showed up. But he was a good sport. I mean, and it happened to be the day we filmed the temple. It was Jessica Tandy's 80th birthday. And they had a typical Hollywood cast party with no holds barred. And I was the one to be able to give her the bouquet of roses, which was for her 80th birthday. And if you listen closely, if you go back and rewatch the movie, my name in the movie was Dr. Weil, W-E-I-L. Not supposed to be anything to do with Alvin, my name. But one of the extras in the film, who was past president of Temple, when she was coming through right at the steps right there, says to me, "Good Shabbos, Alvin." And and they didn't cut that in the film. If you listen, you can hear it. And being the ham that I am, even though that's not maybe a good thing for a rabbi to be, but when Miss Daisy came through, I ad-lib, reached over and gave her a kiss, which was not in the script at all. And the great actress Jessica Tandy was, as she walked past me after I kissed her, turned to the lady next to her and kind of went, "Oh, that rabbi, such a nice man," and just kept on, and all that's in the film too. So it was my claim to fame, and the fact that it was such a wonderful film, and 5 Academy Awards, and was shown all over the world. And people would see it in the States, not having any idea, and they would tell me later in the middle of the movie, the audience would look at them like they're crazy. They would say, "That's Alvin," in the middle, and they would shout out. My rabbi buddies from all over. So it was great. But it was Rabbi Rothschild's unbelievable commitment to social justice that helped me majorly in not only becoming a rabbi, but in being and following in his footsteps to the best of my ability.
Yeah. It's such a vessel for that progressive thought. Well, why don't we head over? I think you said
Yeah, let's go.
about,
Let's switch into
Piedmont
Piedmont Park for a second,
All right.
and then head maybe out towards here, and drive by Grady High School, because those, for all of us, I think our high school years are formative
Oh, yeah.
years. And
Before we hit Grady High School with Rabbi Alvin Sugarman, we head over to Piedmont Park and the surrounding neighborhoods, where he shared more special memories.
when I was confirmed at Temple at age 16, within a month or so of that was 1954, we're going to come to 712 Park Drive.
712.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, gee whiz, always thought it was way up on a hill as a kid. That's where we played snake in the grass and had all my Passover Seder's here, every Rosh Hashanah, broke every fast here on Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur, meal here, lunch Rosh Hashanah. And of course it looked completely different. They didn't have the upper thing. In the back was Shoni, the big, beautiful white dog. And that's where the roots of my Jewish upbringing were. And they were very much, especially Uncle Sam, my second father, and Mama Ada, as everybody called her, had all the holiday meals and could not have been more gracious. And it was to their home. They had moved further into Morningside on Merton Road, that I bought Barbara that first week during our courtship to introduce them. And Uncle Sam was a very proper person, so I had my arm around her when I brought her in, and my aunt took her arm and said, "Come on back here." And Uncle Sam called me over to the side and was scolding me, "Don't manhandle the girl." Yeah. That was like 2 nights before I proposed. And Elliot Levitas and the Levitas family, her mother was Ida, and they used to be known. There was a third Ida Copland. There's the 3 Idas. They were all very, very close friends. And so unbelievable holiday memories and memories of how beautiful it was to be Jewish, the warmth of family.
Did you all hang out on front porches? Was that part of?
Yeah, in fact, when we earlier drove by 571 Boulevard, there was a little front stoop there. And at night, we'd take a radio out during the summer, and we'd listen to almost at Braves game, to the Atlanta Cracker ball games. And the interesting thing was, we weren't that far from the ballpark, but somebody would hit a home run, and you could hear the crowd roaring on the radio. Then about a minute or two later, it seemed at least, with the echo of the crowd, the sound from the ballpark would come in. It was fascinating to hear the difference in the frequency, the FM, it wasn't FM then, AM radio bringing it up to us.
And the waves on there.
But that was the thing. Neighbors would sit out on there and the stoop. That's one of the things I think that Barbara loved our house so much, because it has a front porch where you live in now, and you can sit on it and hear the birds chirping as you heard as we were when we were there.
Next stop, just outside Piedmont Park.
There's a lake right there, and my dad would love to bring me to the park, and I always loved to come to the park. And he would sit in one of the swinging benches, and he'd get out of a watch, and he'd say, "Okay, take off." And then I would run and race around the perimeter of the lake, and he would time me, and each time I would try to beat the other days, and that was. And then we had pickup softball games on the ball fields, and I don't know whether I was 9 or 10, if that. Oh, the AJC, which at that time was separate, it was, I guess, the Journal Sunday edition. It was in February, but it was a very warm February, and they took a picture of me snarling like I'm a catcher. They had us pose it, and I told you about early on Parkway, Bobby Woods, his den mother he was my Cub Scout, and he had a bat, and another kid that we didn't know, and was like the umpire behind it. And it made the front page of the sports section. We still have that black and white photograph from the newspaper at home somewhere. But it was at one of those pickup softball games years later, I refer to, I mean years later, on the pulpit in the midst of people beginning to understand that homosexuality was not a choice, it was who and what we were. And what had happened at a temple, we had a lesbian rabbinic student apply. And even though it wasn't spoken, among some of the search people and the board, you could tell she wasn't right, you know, she couldn't relate to our children. And I remember one of our board members said, well, gee, because she was too old, that was the excuse, she was older. And one of our board members said, that's unusual, you just written off every grandparent that's ever existed. But the sermon I gave was related to what happened in Piedmont Park when I was probably 12 years old, maybe 13, probably 12. I was playing first base in one of those little pickup softball games, and it was a high line drive, came up over my head, I jumped up and caught it, was able, and this little stringy-haired blonde girl who was part of the little crowd watching, jumped up and was screaming and clapping, you know, and something happened inside of me. I felt, ooh, you know, all these great feelings. I guess it was a hormone, I don't know, a hormone from schmormones, but something was kicking in, and I told the temple I couldn't help that. It's who and what I was, just like I happen to be heterosexual. Someone who's feminist, that's who and what they are. It's as if it's part of our soul. So that memory from Piedmont Park came all those years later when I was, and I told the congregation that sermon that I had failed them to teach them to accept people when they turned her away.
So here we are at Grady.
Mm-hmm. I think that dry cleaners was the same dry cleaners that was here when I was a student at Grady.
Sig Samuels.
I know there was always a dry cleaners. It was 1932. So, and I was at Grady after 1932. Oh, me.
Grady High School.
Yeah. Used to be Boys High, but they had changed it a couple years before we started.
Work on the school newspaper or theater.
Yeah, and we have a great Grady High School foundation now that they actually, my particular class was a class of 56, we get together just about every month, much less for, you might can park right here, in December we have a holiday party, and it's an extremely close class, and very interestingly close because the Jewish kids and the non-Jewish kids just bonded, and and it's always been that way, not with everybody, but for a huge majority of our class, so that, wife kids, we plan a reunion every time somebody drops a hat.
What do you think it contributed to that? Was there anything in particular? Or just the nature
I think it was just the unique makeup of the particular, just a good group of people. The chemistry was there. A lot of us had gone to Morningside together. Some of it even, sometimes some of the reunions, I bump into people from Smiley, that I talked about from kindergarten on up. And we support the Grady Foundation. And Grady itself today is a very, very fine high school, an important part of the APS. And the quality of the teachers we had. I remember when I began my college career, that English 101, the professor said, anybody in here from Atlanta, a few of us raised, anybody happen to go to Grady High School? Anybody happen to have a teacher named Miss Ray? And Miss Ray was our senior English teacher, and she was the one that prepared us for college, and without knowing, probably prepared me for the rabbinate, because she gave us, we had to do this 10-minute talk, and it was a very rigorous thing, and if you didn't pass it, you couldn't graduate. And our principal, we were the last class to graduate under Dr. Rule Stevens, who went from Grady to head up the Lovett School.
As we near the end of our drive, heading north through the Morningside neighborhood, memories long simmering emerge. Among them, the era around the time of the October 1958 bombing of the temple he would eventually lead.
It was an interesting time. It was, I think, about a year before the temple bombing in Atlanta, and most people think of the temple bombing as people who perpetrated the act were ignorant, they were uneducated, et cetera. But let me tell you a little bit about the climate at Emory, a wonderful institution. It's been a part of my life for a long, long time, even since I've graduated undergraduate. But I remember at a fraternity softball game, I think it was actually the end of my freshman year in '57, on a Friday afternoon, and we were playing a non-Jewish fraternity. I was API, and there had been a rumor going around that Emory was going to end its segregation policies and receive our first African-American student, a young woman who was going to be accepted into the nursery school, and into the nursing school. And you would have thought it was the end of the world. People were, the Yiddish term, Schreingewalt, going nuts. How could Emory have a black person on campus? It wasn't that long before we allowed females on campus. I think actually my entering class of '56 was the first co-ed class. But we're on the sidelines, and the other fraternity had this chant while we were playing the softball game. It went like this: 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. 8, 4, 6, 2. Go on home, you dirty Jew. And that's from my beloved Emory University. So thank God here in 2017, things have radically changed. And Emory has quite a diverse student body now. As human beings, and as a city and as a community, we evolve and change. And that's, to me, is what makes us most human.
We've talked about places you went. Were there any places that were off limits that you felt that you wouldn't go or couldn't go? Or that you wished you could have gone to?
Well, that's very interesting that you asked that, because every now and then, my downtown Rotary Club would meet at one of the spots that I knew was restricted. And I think maybe they had just started allowing the first 1 or 2 Jewish members, but before the Piedmont Driving Club had its first Jewish member, and I would receive an invitation from some community or civic group that was meeting there, I would not go. Would not go. But thank goodness what we're talking about is past tense. But it was very real, and they were neighborhoods. I remember Janice Rothschild, Rabbi Rothschild's widow, telling me and several others when they were looking for a home when they first got married in the 40s, and they were told quite bluntly, we don't want your kind in this neighborhood, and so there were plenty of parts of Buckhead that were restricted. And I remember my father telling me going in, he was also a traveling salesman in parts of Georgia where they had horrible signs that said on the front yard, no, and they would use the N-word in plural, Jews or dogs allowed. And it was very clear to me very early on as a youngster that if I met somebody who hated Jews, they also hated blacks. If I met somebody who hated blacks, they also hated Jews. And I think that may be part of the incredible bond that has existed for so long between the struggle of my African American neighbors and the Jewish people, because they understand. And in fact, when Mrs. King was murdered by that insane, person while she was playing the organ at Ebenezer, and Rabbi Rothschild had already passed away, and I was already the senior rabbi, and I went by with my wife Barbara to his home. Even though I hadn't met him prior to then, he got up out of his chair and grabbed me and simply said, "Rabbi, I know you understand." And that spoke volumes of understanding of all those decades and years.